Hey, want a free ebook that explains how to search for work and nail a job interview? Go to letsplore.com and download it free like others have. Now back to the show.
You start with your decision. I'm going to do this. I'm going to create this result. And then you create some kind of a daily action plan that's going to move you towards it. One of the things that I'm really committed the rest of my life to is showing people that there is a way out of their suffering. That so much of what we do to beat ourselves down and doubt ourselves is all self-created. And to show people that no matter what's happening in your life, you can find a different way. And the action steps that I take every single day, one is at least once a day I record a video on Facebook reminding people of a specific truth or a strategy they can use to be more positive. I make sure that I go and support people. I congratulate them. I wish them a happy birthday. I let them know that they matter. I tell my wife and my kids that I love them, that I'm proud of them. So it's little ways that you can remind the universe that there's goodness, there's kindness, and that they matter. And that's really in service of relieving the suffering.
Let's Plore Episode 7. Hey Explorers, welcome to Let's Plore with Adrian Aguilar. Let's Plore helps millennials figure out what they want to do with their lives. I do this by interviewing amazing guests who share their experiences as it relates to passion, self-improvement, and mindset. Get ready to learn, plan, and take action in your own life. Thanks for listening. Welcome to the show. Hey Explorers, today's guest is Brian King. He is an international presenter on ADHD and a #1 best-selling author. Brian, welcome to the show.
It's an absolute pleasure, sure. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, no problem. So before we even start the show, I just have to say, I've had some amazing guests on the show, but in getting to know you and reading up on your past, you're one of the most incredible and inspiring human beings I've ever met. I'm excited to have you on my show today. Thanks for taking some time out of your day.
Wow, I'm humbled. Thank you very much for that intro.
Let's Plore is about helping millennials figure out what they want to do with their lives. What advice would you give them?
One thing you got to figure out is what problem you are determined to solve in this world. Because more and more, and the colleges haven't quite caught up with this yet, more and more the world is looking for specialists and expertise. And the more I see some of the millennials that I follow and inspired by have found a niche for themselves. Something that they're really excited about either educating people on, or they want to come up with solutions and solve the problem. And they're finding a wonderful amount of opportunities for themselves. Because we live in this very digital world where you can reach as far as the internet will take you. So begin with your passion to really solve a key problem in society.
Really great advice. And that's one reason why I'm starting this podcast. I struggled with figuring out what I want to do with my life. And after 4 years, I figured, it's providing value not only to myself, but the audience that's soon to be. So I kind of want to tie your advice into your journey about adversity and how you became one of the most positive people I've ever met. So let's backtrack and start off when you were a child. So how did other students and teachers treat you growing up?
Like crap. I was a very awkward kid. I had undiagnosed ADHD and dyslexia, so I struggled in class. I was always 1 or 2 steps behind everybody else. I would ask questions a couple of minutes after the teacher had already moved on because it took me time to figure out what I wanted to ask, and the teacher was frustrated with me, my classmates were frustrated with me. It often carried over into the playground where I was bullied horribly. I was intimidated, I was threatened, I was punched in the stomach, I was pushed down, and this just followed me up until high school. For whatever reason, people thought that I was beneath them, I was weird, and whatever reason they needed to treat me poorly, they used it.
That's definitely a bummer. But I actually want to share a story with you that nobody really else knows. It's just personal family and close friends that I've never really wanted to share. But now that I'm starting to build a brand for myself, I think it's time. When I was 5 years old, I actually had a rock thrown into my eye, and it was almost to the point where I almost lost my eye, but thankfully the doctor did the surgery, saved it. as a result, I had a scar going down the middle of my eye, which was literally a white line. And I had that for about 10 years or so until I was about 15. So, of course, I would always get stares and people would just stare at me and look at me like, what is that? I didn't really get, during middle or elementary school and middle school, I wasn't really made fun of. It's until I got into high school that people started making fun of me and, questioning what was wrong with my eye. Sometimes they would think, it's a contact lens that's screwed up. And unfortunately, I had to go through 3 more surgeries because there was some sort of bubble building up that they thought my tear duct wasn't draining fully. And the result was cutting half of my eye out, replacing it with tissue. And now I have a prosthesis. And throughout high school, because it was a 2-3 year process, I wore sunglasses all the time, even inside the classroom, because I was healing. I didn't want anybody to see, the pink tissue in my eye. And of course, I was made fun of, and it sucked. It wasn't the greatest feeling. And once I hit senior year, I actually had the prosthesis in place. Everything was fully recovered. And it was one of the most awkward feelings going to the first day of the first day of senior year in high school. Because at that point, I actually was finally able to come in without my sunglasses and, try to be normal. And the reality is everybody else treated me normally. They didn't see anything different in me. It was just self-imposed throughout this entire time.
That's a blessing that people met you as a human being instead of somebody to be looked judgmentally upon.
I'm kind of curious. So for those who don't know, what is ADHD and what is dyslexia?
ADHD, it's a term made up by the psychiatric community. It stands for Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder. And there are 3 specific symptoms that need to be present. You have an extreme difficulty with distractibility. It's hard for you to maintain your focus. You have hyperactivity either in terms of your body, you feel like you need to move all the time, you're always fidgeting, or it's hyperactivity in your mind. You have racing thoughts. There's always these intrusive thoughts and you can't stay focused because every shiny object is catching your attention. And the other one is impulsivity. You have a hard time thinking before you act. And that shows up in childhood, with you're always poking people, you're always grabbing things, you're blurting things out. Adults, it could show up in making impulsive decisions and poor financial decisions and so on. And the dyslexia, there are a variety of dyslexias, but it basically refers to the inability or extreme difficulty absorbing and interpreting the written word. Now, in my case, I have a hard time retaining and comprehending what it is I read. So if I try to read anything, it's like I'm moving at a snail's pace. And even though I get through a paragraph, by the time I get to the next paragraph, I've forgotten what I've already read. So that's what it looks like for me.
How were your parents growing up?
Well, my dad, as we now know, he has Asperger's, which is a form of autism, as do my 3 sons. And he was very absent. He thought his job was to work and not really raise the kids. So he really didn't spend too much time with us. He didn't take very much interest in our lives. And even to this day, he's very, very private. He doesn't have any friends. He enjoys solitary activities. My mom was a little bit on the smothering side. It turns out she has ADHD as well. And she has a lot of difficulty with her own impulsivity and being very disorganized. So, honestly, it's amazing my siblings and I kind of came out of there alive. Between a father with Asperger's, a mom with ADHD. I give them a lot of credit for doing the best they could with what they had.
That's great. And that seems as if it reflected on you as a parent, because you also mentioned you have 3 autistic sons. How has that been, throughout the course of however old they are?
My boys are 18, 14, and 11. And the 2 older ones had the biggest struggles. And when I married their mother, we are since divorced, and I married their mother, and she is very, very quirky in her own right. I suspect she's on the spectrum as well. And we married each other because we were shy and, insecure, and, we kind of found somebody and said, okay, let's get married, And the best thing to come from that is the 3 boys. But unfortunately, when it came to light that my oldest was on the spectrum, I dove in immediately and wanted to learn all I could to make sure that he was taken care of and did well in life. And his mother just kind of faded into the background and pretty much tuned out. Like she just couldn't handle the responsibility or didn't want to. So she just kind of put it all on me. And I remembered my childhood, how much I suffered at the hands of teachers and peers. And I saw my son about to go through the same experience. And my immediate response was, over my dead body, I'm going to become his best advocate to make sure that he succeeds in life. And then his brother came along, who had even more challenges and was diagnosed with autism. He had an extreme speech delay, very, very sensitive to light and sound, and would have meltdowns, panic attacks, because the world was too overwhelming for him. And I stayed to my commitment that I've got to teach these boys how to be effective and successful members of society. So it never occurred to me to throw in the towel and just say, oh, well, he's autistic, so he can behave like this, and this is perfectly okay. Because I wasn't going to send them into the world helpless. So that really became my guiding outcome, is they are going to be competent members of society. And we could talk for hours on how I did that. But now my oldest boy has started college. He was one of the top in his class graduating high school. He's got friends. He's interested in a girl. He went to prom. He's got a job. And this is a kid that was running out of the classroom in panic and so anal about his structure that the slightest variation would throw him into a rage. And now he's this kind, helpful gentleman with, nothing but the future ahead of him. And it took a hell of a lot of work. I don't want to make it sound easy by any means, because it wasn't, but it's possible.
You're an awesome human being and a parent. I can definitely tell you that.
Thank you.
You were mentioning that you didn't want your son to go through the same things that you went through. So is that kind of when you had the, I guess you can say, aha moments when they were young, when the oldest was young, that there needs to be a change? There could be positivity in autism and ADHD and everything else that's happening in your guys' life?
Well, I said the positivity came from my study of Buddhism, which I've been doing for about 20 plus years now. And I've had the pleasure of studying under a few Zen masters. And what I learned from that was that we all suffer. Mm-hmm. And it's nothing that you can remove from the human experience. It's hardwired into it. But with that suffering, there's also time for joy. There's also time for humility. So one thing I emphasize with everything my boys was going through is that this is temporary. This will pass. And this will teach us something. And one thing that I discovered is that as much as I wanted to prevent my boys from having the same experience I did, I couldn't stop it. They were still bullied. They were still misunderstood by teachers. But one thing that they had that I didn't have when I was a child was a well-informed parent. My mother tried to be an advocate, but back then we didn't have labels like ADHD. So she didn't know why I was struggling. She did her best with the information that she had. And she also did not have the experience I did growing up. She had friends, she was highly social. So my boys had the benefit of my story. The fact that I'd been there, done that, and rose above it. So I was able to tell them, it gets better. And I'm going to be by your side. Through thick and thin, through hell or high water, doesn't matter what it is, we will get through this together. So I made sure that they did not feel alone even during the hardest times.
And this is a little late, but what is autism?
Autism it's a very complex neurobiological disorder. You see kids that seem to be in their own world. They don't make eye contact. They have a hard time connecting with other people. They have a lot of sensory sensitivities. You can't touch them because they feel pain when you touch them. Bright lights, loud sounds, too quickly, things changing too fast throws them into a panic. They're not very flexible in their thinking. But the term autism comes from I don't know if it's a Latin root, but it means selfism, meaning turned into themselves. But it's mostly understood in terms of the social difficulties, having a really hard time connecting with other people. So it can make these kids very socially awkward and easily cast aside as the weirdo by peers. So with all the complexities that go on with autism, these kids need a lot of support in order to be successful in life.
And I know we're kind of jumping around, but I want to transition back into some of your hardships that you went through. So I was also reading up, at the end of high school, you also had cancer. So how was that discovered, and how was that treated?
It was discovered because it hurt. It was testicular cancer, and I was just laying in bed one night, and I had this shooting pain in my groin, like somebody had just kicked me there. And chalk one up to health class. I remembered, for whatever reason, it stuck with me in sophomore year health class. They split the boys and the girls up. They taught the girls breast examination. They taught the boys testicular examination. I always remembered that for some reason. So when I felt the pain, I did the self-exam and found a lump. So I went to my parents and I said, hey, I found this lump, and can we go to the doctor? And the doctor, the next day we got in to see my family doctor, and she felt it, and she called up her good friend, the urologist, and said, you got to see this kid right away. So he saw me, did an ultrasound, and noticed that, hey, there's a mass in there that shouldn't be there. We need to do some surgery. So 3 days later, I was in surgery. This was 3 weeks before high school graduation. He diagnosed it was a malignancy, but I think we got it all. So, okay, great, I can go on with my life. So I finished my last 3 weeks of high school, graduated, was preparing for college. A month later, we had a follow-up blood test to make sure everything was clear. And there was a protein in my blood that the tumor released that lets the doctor know that the tumor is there, okay? So they took the blood test before surgery, and they took it after. After, there was no more tumor. So that's what told them that I was in the clear. Well, guess what? A month later, they took the blood test to make sure the tumor wasn't there, and the protein marker was 5 times higher than it was before my surgery.
Whoa.
So my cancer was back, and it was spreading like wildfire. So they said, okay, pack your bags. You need to go to the hospital. You're starting chemotherapy tomorrow. So I spent my summer in chemotherapy, losing my hair, being in excruciating pain. My friends either didn't know it came back, or they did know and kept their distance because they didn't know how to deal with it. So I basically was socially isolated through that experience. And that caused all kinds of pain and depression and rage, to such deep levels that I do not wish upon anybody. But because having gone to those depths and finding my way back out of it, I think in many ways that has been the source of the compassion that I found for other people. People can come to me with whatever pain they have and describe it to me, and I can just be there for them and say, yeah, I've been there, I get that. And also remind them that as deep as this pain is, there is a way out. And I lend them my ear, I lend them my advice, and just my support, my presence, to let them know you're not alone in this, and I'm not going anywhere.
And in going through this angered period of time, what made you decide, hey, let me go back to college, let me actually go back into society and live a normal life?
Well, I saw the world passing me by. Everybody was going on with their life. People were happy. They were having relationships. They were getting jobs. And I was sitting there feeling pissed off. And I said to myself one day, man, if I'm going to live for another 50 years, I'll be damned if I live it like this. So I found myself a counselor to work with. And he was a beautiful man, very, very compassionate, very tender-hearted, which is something I'd never had in a male role model before. And he was a social worker, and I worked with him for about 2 years, dealing with the depression and my trust issues and the anger. And it was through that relationship that I realized that social work was a good fit for me. And that's what I got my master's degree in, and that's what I've been doing ever since.
That's awesome. That's great. And so transitioning a little forward, I know you mentioned earlier, so your wife left you, but with the product of your 3 autistic sons, which is the greatest thing that you've ever experienced. How did you overcome that betrayal and learning how to trust again?
Well, that was devastating. And I took the boys and we moved in with my parents so I could get my act together. And I had, just through my working in the autism community, I'd surrounded myself with some pretty awesome people. And I asked one of them, I said, how on earth do you learn to trust again? And they said something very plain, but very profound. They said, because you have to. Because you can't go through life not letting people get close to you and not forming those relationships. You have to trust again. And here's the story that I love telling this story. Mm-hmm. I had, the morning I found out she was cheating, I'd gotten in an accident. Somebody ran a red light and totaled my car. And so after, her and I, after, about a week after I found out, I picked up the boys and moved out. And I had to get a new car. Mm-hmm. So my mom took me to the dealership, and I'm talking to, of all people, the used car salesman. And I told him my situation. And he looked me in the eye and he says, I want you to listen to what I'm about to tell you. He said, she did not leave you. She got out of your way.
Yeah.
He said, there's somebody out there for you. And when you meet her, she's going to love you like you deserve to be loved. And she's going to love your kids like they were your own. And I didn't know whether he was just blowing smoke up my butt or whatever, but I hung on to that. And about a year later, I reconnected with a childhood friend that I hadn't seen since about 6th grade. I've known her since we were 4 years old. And we reconnected on Facebook. Turns out she was just one town away. And we started hanging out. She'd never been married. It was just her and her dog. And we fell in love and got married. And it's been almost 7 years now.
That's awesome.
And she's exactly the person that guy told me about.
That's great. And now you're happier than ever.
Yeah, I mean, so many things have happened to me. My growth as a father, as a man, just as a human being, through being married to her. It's just been amazing.
So now I also want to transition a little fast forward into what happened about 2 years ago. So you were diagnosed with an incurable connective tissue disorder. What is that called, and what does that mean?
It's called Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, and there are 6 types of it. I have type 3, which is the most common type. And basically what it means is that the connective tissue, the glue that holds your tissues together, the gene that is responsible for producing that is faulty. So it ends up making crappy connective tissue. And when you're talking about, the things that hold your intestines together, the things that hold your muscles together, the things that hold your joints together. So I have very, very fragile ligaments and tendons. My joints like to slip out of place. I have bones in my feet that shift whenever I stand up. My thumbs pop out when I open a jar of peanut butter. My kneecaps lock all the time. My collarbones pop out when I reach up in the cabinet to get something, and it hurts when it happens. And as they get weaker, it's harder for me to hold my body up. Just sitting up and watching TV can be exhausting. I have to use a wheelchair more and more. And as it turns out, my younger 2 boys have it as well. So they have the forms of autism, the ADHD, and now the EDS. And there are days when I just want to curse at my maker, for piling all this on my lap. Mm-hmm. But then I remember that my boys are watching me live my life. And I don't want them to see that their destiny is being helpless. I want them to see that you can be resourceful, you can find solutions, you can live as fully as possible, no matter what life throws at you.
It's so amazing to hear your story and all the hardships that you've gone through. And, from an outside perspective, some may question, how the hell do you do it? How can you go through such hardships over and over and over in your life, but then come out to be one of the most positive and happiest, persons you can be?
Well, don't get me wrong. There are days when it sucks.
Yeah. I mean, we all have those.
I have them. Yeah. And then I lay in bed and let the dizziness pass, or something like that. But one of the ways I get through it, and I don't know what to attribute it to, but ever since I was a kid, there's been this little voice in my head every time I felt like giving up. There's been this little voice saying, don't you dare. It would say, this is not as good as it gets. It gets better. You just have to fight for it and find it. And I don't know where it came from. It's been there as long as I can remember, but it's like that little swift kick that says, get up.
Yeah.
You're not staying down. Get back up and find the solution, find something better. And that's what keeps me going.
It's great. So in going back into college and after you went through cancer, what was the first job that you've had out of school?
The first job I had after working, because I worked for my family business off and on throughout those years. But the first job I had out of school was working for a hospice. I was working with people that were terminally ill, and they wanted to be comfortable. Either they wanted to die at home, or they wanted to stay in their assisted living facility, but they didn't want to suffer. And I was the social worker that helped them through their own grief. I helped the family members through grief, and I did that for 5 years.
And how did that have a positive impact in your life?
Well, it had a positive impact on my life because of all the stories that I heard. You know, World War II veterans, people that were big, community organizers. One of the people that we looked after was a labor leader during the Civil Rights Movement, and he had meetings with Martin Luther King Jr., and he was telling us all these stories. And just hearing how people lived their lives. And not all of them were happy stories. One guy that I took care of, he was an alcoholic who abused his kids the entire time, and they wanted nothing to do with him. Their opinion was, call me when it's over. And all points in between. So I was constantly being reminded to look at how I was living my own life and seeing, am I doing the best I can with the time I'm given?
Did most of the people you took care of look back on their life in guilt, or were they happy with it?
I found more guilt from the family members. If they had some resentment towards the person that was dying, or if they said, well, I wish we'd have done this, or I should have told them this sooner, or, I regret so-and-so. And I had to help them find a way to discover gratitude in everything that had happened instead of keeping score over the things that they felt weren't good enough about their relationship with that person.
And it's interesting because I still think that's a common theme today. And kind of to transition that into, entrepreneurship, at least for me, that's one reason why I quit without having a steady income to pursue what I'm doing today, is because I did not want to look back on life, 30, 40 years from now and say, what the heck happened? How did I get here? I still don't like my job. I still, can't do the things that I enjoy. So I just took the initiative that it has to be done now so I can look back and say, this is what I did with my life and I'm happy with it.
Yeah, I see countless examples of people. If you're on Facebook, you can see it in the news feed. I have like 3,200, I don't want to call them friends because I don't talk to the majority of them, but I see in the news feed, hey, my brother just died suddenly yesterday, or my husband was killed in a motorcycle accident. My husband had a heart attack on his way home from work. And I look at that stuff and it keeps me mindful of the lie that I have tomorrow. People that procrastinate, I'll just do it tomorrow. There are these constant reminders that if you don't do it now, you're just opening the door to regret. So if you want to do it, take action. At least get started.
And I definitely agree with you 100%. I do have plans for, 5-year, 10-year goals, but the reality is I may not be around tomorrow. So you got to live and enjoy life in the present moment because you may not have it tomorrow.
Right. And if you never accomplish it, at least you're working on it. You're staying in action. You're being in the creative flow. You're making things happen. That's the most important thing, that you are on that journey.
And that's definitely true. I mean, I'm the most happiest I've ever been in my life after quitting my job, which is kind of ironic and weird because I don't have a steady form of income, but I could focus on me and myself. I've started to meditate. I started working out. I started eating healthier. And now I'm just trying to build a business from the ground up. So
excellent. And you're already developing a lot of habits that are going to serve you in doing that.
Yeah. And speaking of habits, do you have any sort of productivity practices like meditation?
Yeah, I meditate every single day.
And that goes back to your 20 years of Buddhist practices.
Mm-hmm.
Now, say for someone who's starting out, like myself, I'm only about 2 to 3 weeks in. Where do you recommend I start?
Well, you start with your decision. I'm going to do this. I'm going to create this result. And then you create some kind of a daily action plan that's going to move you towards it. One of the things that I'm really committed the rest of my life to is showing people that there is a way out of their suffering. That so much of what we do to beat ourselves down and doubt ourselves is all self-created. And to show people that no matter what's happening in your life, you can find a different way. And the action steps that I take every single day, one is at least once a day I record a video on Facebook reminding people of a specific truth or a strategy they can use to be more positive. I make sure that I go and support people. I congratulate them. I wish them a happy birthday. I let them know that they matter. I tell my wife and my kids that I love them and that I'm proud of them. So it's little ways that you can remind the universe that there's goodness, there's kindness, and that they matter. And that's really in service of relieving the suffering. So figure out what actions you can take, no matter how big or small, that are going to be in service of your goal. Because if you don't keep yourself in that space, you can lose momentum. So it doesn't always have to be these big, huge gestures. It's done in very little ways.
Which is true. I think most people tend to think about the negatives or, what's wrong in their life versus the positives. My cell phone broke today. I'm really upset. And then it just screws up the rest of their day. Versus thinking back and say, you know what, I'm grateful for, waking up this morning, being able to go to work, being able to eat breakfast, being able to hang out with my friends and family or whatever it may be. But I feel as if that shift in focus for myself has definitely been beneficial. Every night before I go to bed, I look back and go over the 3 wins I had in my business and the 3 things that I'm grateful or thankful for.
A gratitude ritual is essential. When you wake up in the morning, say a prayer of gratitude. I don't mean a prayer, to like a higher power. I just mean sit there and reflect upon that you're grateful that you woke up. You're grateful for the opportunities, both known and unknown, that are going to come throughout your day. And at the end of it, you are grateful for the people you came in contact with, the day you had, the lessons you learned.
So do you tend to, so you wake up in the morning and you go through what you mentioned, a grateful prayer. Do you also meditate throughout the day, or is it just in the morning and at night?
Oh, I meditate whenever I have a chance throughout the day. And even if it's just 30 seconds to close your eyes, breathe deeply into your abdomen and center yourself and make sure you stay present so you're not caught up in the, I should be doing this, I should be doing that. That conversation in your head that tells you what you're doing in the moment isn't good enough. And that's one thing to really protect yourself from. So much of the work of becoming successful, at least in the path that I'm on, is managing that inner gremlin that says you're not smart enough, you're not good enough, you're not skinny enough. And if you're looking to serve that gremlin, you're going to be unhappy for the rest of your life because it can always find something that's not good enough.
And how has this mindset helped you become an international presenter and write several books?
Well, the books kind of happened on accident. The first one I ever wrote was when I was in my undergrad for social work, because I would keep throwing out advice to my classmates for how to handle the pressure and handle the stress. And one day one of them asked me, "Can you write that down?" And I said, why? She says, "Because that's really useful. I could use that." And it was the first time anybody ever asked me to do that for them.
Yeah.
And I really respected her, and I started writing it, and before I knew it, there were 7 pages. And so I gave it to her, and she says, "Oh, can you expand on this part, this part?" Then I went home and I said, "Oh, wow, I got 30 pages now." So I figured, well, heck, I'll just keep going and put my ideas down on paper and sharing them with people. And I don't know how long it took me. I think maybe about a year later I had my first book. And it was, after that, it was the same thing. It was in response to people telling me, "Oh, can you write this down? Can you transcribe this?" And people liked the way I communicated my ideas. So parents began connecting me with their school districts and saying, "You got to let this guy come and talk. He really explains what it feels like to be autistic or what it feels like to have ADHD. You have to hire him to come and talk." So I started recording my presentations and I had them transcribed. And next thing you know, another book. And people that listened to my presentations over the years, that read the book, began reaching out to me, offering me other opportunities in different parts of the country. And a couple years ago, one of my mentors was contacted by somebody in Medellin, Colombia. He was putting together the first ever conference just for autism and wanted her to come down and present. And she said, pick your top people to come with you, pick some other people. And one of the people she chose was me. And I was very, very just blown away by the opportunity. So I went and spent a week down in Colombia. We did a couple presentations in Medellin, a few in Bogota, and it was an absolutely amazing experience.
That's great. And what made you transition into becoming and correct me if I'm wrong here, a coach or a consultant, as well as speaking in public about, getting over, or not getting over, but overcoming ADHD or, autism and all the negative effects that comes with it?
Well, a lot of it is because I want to pay forward all the help I've been given over the years. One thing that is really dangerous for any parent with a special needs child is that feeling of being alone. Nobody understands my kid, nobody knows what it's like. And the more you can remove that sense of isolation, the more empowered parents can become, because they realize there are people out there that get it. There are resources that can help you. And so many people helped me when I reached out to raise my own boys, that I see people in similar circumstances and want to give them that hand up so that they don't suffer and they don't end up taking their frustration and their helplessness out on their own kid, and in turn teaching their kid to grow up feeling helpless and anxious and resenting the world.
How many people would you say you've impacted?
Oh goodness, I would only be guessing. Yeah, easily hundreds. When you look at what happens on social media, you can put a couple thousand out there. I get emails from people that have read my book and say it's the best book they've read, and it changed the way they see their child. And every day on Facebook and Twitter, I'm gaining more and more followers, people that like what I do. And when I see those numbers, I don't see it. I'm not keeping score. I just say, this is great. This is more people that are being helped, and I hope that they go on to help people as well.
An inspiring message. So now we're starting to transition into the later half of the interview into what I call the quick shot questions. So it's a round of questions that I ask quickly. Your answers could definitely be as long as you want it to be. The first question is, what's the difference between being successful and being happy?
The difference between being successful and being happy. Well, being happy is something that you find in the moment. It's a very personal, very intimate experience. It's that feeling of being fulfilled, being grateful. Being successful is much more measurable. You have this timeline, these things that you've checked off, that you can say, see, I've traveled this journey, and because I've accomplished these things, I'm therefore successful.
Do you have any future goals set for your vision, your plans?
Well, my future goals for myself as an individual, I'm kind of getting used to the wheelchair. I'm still kind of struggling with it because I was used to running around and going on hikes and all that stuff. Coming to terms with that, and then once I learn that, to continue to model that the less than perfect life is still worth living. It can be just as fulfilling, you can be just as happy, even though life can be challenging for you. I want to continue to be a role model for my boys, somebody worth looking up to. I want to build my own business to be much more stronger on an international level, so that I can be somebody that's a voice for acceptance for people with differences. Because I don't like the idea that people with disabilities are still kind of looked down upon as second-class citizens. I want full inclusion, where if somebody rolls up to you in a wheelchair, you don't give it a second thought. You say, oh, this is just another human being. I'd like to meet this person and hear their story. That's probably my biggest goal.
This may be getting personal, and you can tell me if I am. What do you think of, say, someone who tries to help you out if you are in a wheelchair, say, open the door for you? Is there ever a time where you say, hey, I can do everything myself, or do you accept the help that others give you?
Never. I look them in the eye and I thank them. I say, thank you, sir, or thank you, ma'am. I really appreciate your kindness. Because I want them to know that their gesture was meaningful, that it wasn't just some rote thing you're supposed to do for people.
That's great. What book or books do you recommend our listeners to read?
First one that I think should be required reading in every school is A Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. That book has had the greatest impact on me of any book I've ever read.
Do you have a favorite quote?
Favorite quote, I had to paraphrase it. But one thing that, again, from A Man's Search for Meaning, is that no matter how hard your circumstances, you still have the freedom to choose your attitude.
How do you continue to challenge yourself?
The way I continue to challenge myself is I keep myself learning. I'm the perpetual student. I'm always curious about what else is there, what other options do I have, what ideas have I not yet discovered. So I'm either reading a blog post or listening to an audiobook, or we're starting a new book every single day because I want to keep my mind fresh and sharp.
Is it okay if one has not figured out what they want to do in life?
Well, yeah, there's always a part where you don't know something. There's always a not knowing, and that's what keeps life interesting, is that you continue to ask questions. So if you're asking yourself questions, good. It means you're still learning.
Now, kind of going back to the challenges, I actually think I read somewhere, is it true that you don't take any medication for your ADHD?
That's correct.
Is it possible for others to do the same?
Well, it is possible. It's a lot harder work, though.
Yeah.
You need a lot more resources. The main reason I don't take it is I tried the stimulant meds, but I have very high blood pressure. Mm-hmm. And I took the stimulant meds one day and I almost had a stroke.
Wow.
My wife had to call 911. They had to give me nitro and all that stuff. So we tried the non-stimulant and it really didn't touch it. So now I just I use caffeine to give my mind that boost of focus in the morning. I drink coffee. In terms of my racing mind, I use my meditation practice to keep my mind slowed down and kind of under control. And the mindfulness that I've developed has helped me learn to manage the impulsivity. But again, it's a lot of work to develop that kind of internal discipline, but it is possible.
And just like with anything else, it doesn't happen overnight.
Right. It's a process. Mm-hmm.
That's amazing. You are definitely by far an incredible human being, as I said before, Brian. Definitely appreciate you taking the time to talk to me today. Before we say our goodbyes, where can people find more information about you, your services, or your books?
Best place is to go to my website, which is brianraymondking.com.
Again, really, thank you for taking the time to talk to me. This has been amazing. You're truly inspiring. Thanks again, Brian.
Thank you, Adrian. I really appreciate it.
All right, take care. Hey, Explorers. Thanks so much for listening. My guest and I really appreciate it. If you would like more information about my guest, head over to letsplore.com/podcast. You can also find me on social media. My handle for all social media is Let's Plore. Head over to letsplore.com to download a free ebook that explains how to search for work and nail a job interview. If you enjoyed this episode, read my blog at letsplore.com/blog, subscribe to the podcast in iTunes, rate and review my show in iTunes, and share this episode with family and friends.